Hello, everyone. This is Marc Sabatella from Outside Shore Music, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. This is our regular series. We talk about some aspect of creating music, composition, arranging, improvisation, all the different creative acts in music making. And as we have been lately, we're going to be looking at counterpoint and specifically the subject of canon. And so we have a project people have been submitting some really nice entries for, and we're going to talk about, well, what's going on in these canons and the process of doing it and how we can actually use this. So I want to address that last point first. So you may have noticed this week's newsletter, I had my In Theory article was on context of canon, and that a piece doesn't have to be a full canon to make the idea of canon useful. And I used the theme music that we just listened to with some stuttering. We listened to that as an example of canon. And it is a canon in that the violin one part right here. Let me turn my volume back up. The violin one part that's weird. All right, I'm just going to play it. Oops, I got to turn on my keyboard and play it. So we have... right? Those first 5 bars of melody are exactly the same as other than tonal adjustments to fit the key and to fit the chord progression that I'm creating. So, in fact, that section of this piece is a canon. It's a canon, a fifth below, right? A fourth above or a fifth below in this case is where the imitation is at the time distance of 1 measure. And then there is another repetition of that same thing in the viola. I'm guessing at these pitches. That's an E, right? So that is an exact imitation of the original follower, but now it's several bars later. And that's as far as the canon goes. After that, there's little bits of, imitative little snippets of things here and there. But as far as being actual canon, it's only the case for like 5 bars. But it was useful for that to be the case. And this is often the case. Like a fugue is not a canon. But as we're going to see, portions of fugues might be in canon, meaning that sort of exact overlapping imitation between voices. So that's kind of our background for anyone who hasn't been following the course and knowing what we're doing with canon. So it's going to be a process that I've laid out for creating a canon in 3 voices, in which it's really 2 voices that participate in the canon, and then a third voice that's just free, that's filling out the chord and adding additional interest, much as the cello is here. What the cello is doing, right? That has nothing to do with the canon. That's just basically a baseline to support the canon. So those are the examples we are going to look at here. And I saw a couple people when they posted their canons had asked questions, and I tried to address some things already, but I wasn't able to address anything this morning other than one comment to Shelley. I think Shelley. Shelley, you had asked, I think it was you, had asked about being confused when I said something along the lines of you don't want to go from 1 to 4 too early because it sounds like the ending or something like that. And you said you didn't understand what I meant by that. Well, I don't understand what I meant by that either. So I'm thinking that statement must be out of context. So not Shelley. All right, then I'll figure out who it was shortly, because I will be scrolling through these things. In fact, I'm just going to try to find that one right away. It was so it wasn't Shelley. It was Rebecca. Rebecca, if you are here, you had this comment about made in the canon construction demo about how you don't want to go from 1 to 4 in the beginning because it sounds like the end. And I'm just not sure what that comment might actually mean. So I'm sure I had a point, but I think maybe your restatement of it is causing me to not recognize what my own point was. So we'll if Rebecca, you are here and want to clarify that, I can try to answer it here. Otherwise, you'll be able to follow up later. So what I'm going to do is just check out I'm going to play one or two, maybe even just one of the since Rebecca's is right here, we're just going to listen to that one. This is the outline that we start with. And for again, broader context, for anyone who hasn't really been following this, what I'm suggesting is a very specific technique for building canons, in which you first create an outline of your canon and then you fill in the outline. It's not necessarily it's not the only way to make canons. I don't know if it's the most popular way or not, but it's an effective way because it avoids a fairly common problem that happens if you try building a canon using a brute force approach, which I will contrast with in a bit. A brute force approach is write a measure, copy and paste it to the other voice. Write a measure, copy and paste the other voice. Write a measure, copy and paste the other voice. You can totally write canons that way with no pre-planning, and it will always work. But the results tend to just not go anywhere, not do anything interesting. And by planning the outline of the canon first, you often can get a little better results harmonically and just overall just the overall sense of what's happening if you do a little pre-planning. So the idea in the pre-planning is it's still write a measure, copy and paste, write a measure, copy and paste, write a measure, copy and paste, but we're going to be aiming for thirds and sixths between the two voices. So she has this in the key of, I guess, F. Yes, as F major. And then the imitation she has is at the fourth. So her second voice is coming in the top voice, a fourth above. And then so the leader goes up a step, so her follower goes up a step as well. And then her leader from there went down a third from the B flat to the G, and then her follower goes down a third from the E to the C. And then the leader goes up a step from G to A, and her follower goes up a step from the C to D. So the leader states something, and then the follower imitates it a measure later. It doesn't always have to be exactly a measure. That was just kind of the parameters I put for this assignment to kind of keep everyone on the same page. And the observation that I made, that's a really key observation, is that if your leader always either goes up a step from measure to measure or down a third from measure to measure, then when your imitation is at the fourth, you're going to get thirds and sixths between the voices. This is one of these like magic things that just sort of works out, because we know the follower is going to have a D in its imitation here. The intervals that harmonize with it the best are going to be B flat and F, right? There's a third below and a sixth below, and you can get that by either going up a step or down a third. And that's going to happen as long as that imitation is at the fourth. That's always going to be the case. Up a step or down a third in your leader is going to create good results. So basically, we had a whole slew of people post outlines, and they're all perfect, because as long as you do that, you can't fail. As long as you create your leader going up a step or down a third. She goes up a step, down a third, up a step, down a third, up a step. And then at the end, she goes up a third because she's trying to create a cadence. And that was the point I made at the very end. You can break that imitation pattern or break whatever else is going on to create a nice cadence at the end. So when you have imitation at the fourth, as long as your leader goes up a step or down a third, it's going to create these nice thirds and sixths at the beginnings of measures. And again, this is just an outline. And no, so it won't be exact imitation. It'll be tonal imitation, which is what the vast majority of canons are going to do. Like here, it was up a half step, but the imitation is up a whole step. And that's the norm, unless you're writing. There's a few very specific contexts where, oh, that went up a half step, so I'm going to make the follower also go up a half step, even though that takes me outside the key. There's some very specific cases where you do that. One is where you don't care about key. Another one is where you have set things up such that that helps you achieve the modulation you want to achieve. You know, there are some very specific cases where that'll work. And in particular, if you think about it, this is exactly what we're going to want here. And yes, the difference between major and minor third, the same thing. So this half step going up, that's because the half step is between scale degree 3 and 4. Well, as soon as you imitate at the fourth, instead of scale degree 3 to 4, it's scale degree 6 going to 7. So if I keep that half step going, that means I'm going to go to flat 7 there. Well, that is one step away on the circle of fifths, where in F, if I use an E flat, that would help me achieve a modulation to B flat, which is certainly a key I might want to modulate to. So it is actually can be useful as a way of achieving modulations if you plan it that way. And so that's going to work out when we have imitation at the fourth. That half step is going to be where you're going to need your chromatic alteration. And so if that had changed to an E flat here, then we would be setting up a possible modulation to B flat, and you just want to plan that. But normally we don't do that. Normally we just let it be diatonic, and then we make the adjustments we want to for harmonic reasons. And so I'm going to show that in a second here. So check this out. If I play this now, I'm going to get sixths everywhere, right? So it's nice. And then at the end, she goes to a tritone to set up that cadence. And the thing is, this is not an interesting melody on its own. And going just nothing but steps and thirds, you might think, oh, that's not a very interesting melody. But remember, that's not necessarily the real melody. This is the outline. The real melody might go, right? Or something like that, as long as it starts on the A. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1. I just made that melody up. And then that would get imitated with. You know, so you can make this melody be pretty much whatever you want, and then harmonize it here, and then you know, copy and paste it there. And once you put that melody in the top voice, now you plan out what's going to go in the bottom voice to counterpoint it. I would say harmonize with it, but we're trying to talk about counterpoint rather than harmony, but harmonize with, right? I'm creating accompaniment in that bottom voice to, which would be, you know, preordained because it's imitating the first voice. So this is the basic process. You're putting an outline together and then filling it in, and of course doing the imitation while you're at it. And when I talked about adding accidentals because you want to, because it's doing something for you, look at the opportunities that get created here. She has an E and a G, and she's calling it a 5 chord because it certainly could be, right? She's putting in Roman numerals as if, you know, we're imagining what the harmonization might be. But it's going to this, which she's saying is a 3 chord, and it certainly could be. It also could have been a 1 chord, because remember, we're going to add a bass later. But this could totally be a G sharp. And then that would actually create the sense of 5 of 3, going to 3. For that matter, this could be a C sharp to help tonicize that D minor chord that's following next, right? So or that could be an F sharp there to tonicize this chord. So when you have the outline here, this is the stage at which you can start planning your tonicizations. And this is exactly the sort of thing that is never going to happen, is unlikely to happen if you're not planning ahead with an outline. You're not going to see what's coming in the next measure because you haven't written the next measure yet. And you'll never occur to you to put an F sharp in this measure right here because you haven't written the next measure yet. And so therefore you'll miss out on that opportunity to create that lovely tonicization. So by doing the outline first and seeing where you're going, you can plan out tonicizations. And maybe they're not direct tonicizations. Maybe they take a minute to get to. Like, for instance, this chord here that I said I was treating as an E chord, but I said she has called a C chord here. If I want to tonicize a C chord, well, I'm going to use a G chord, right? G is the 5 of C. So I might want a G chord somewhere here. And yes, I could put a B natural here, but if I'm not ready for a B natural right away, maybe I do that in the middle of the measure. So instead of a whole note B flat, I might go doo, 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 something like that. To tonicize it, right? I can introduce that B natural somewhere mid-measure. So these are, again, things that you can plan in advance before you've written all your 8th notes and 16th notes and all the fancier stuff that you might eventually be filling in there. So it's a very flexible scheme. And the thing is, if you're going to write a canon, like, you know, the full canon if you're going to try to write a full canon, the whole piece is in canon, you know, maybe it's 20 measures long, you don't have to plan an outline of all 20 measures. Maybe do it 4 measures at a time or 8 measures at a time. And, you know, so you can adapt this methodology to a lot of different situations. So now that we've talked about that, we're going to take a look at some of the people who have actually completed things. And since I just mentioned Shelley, now we're going to look at Shelley's completed version here. And so just by looking at it here, can I sort out where she started from? Somewhere she posted what she started from because I asked everyone to do that. And in theory, I could go find her post to do that with. But instead of doing that, I'm going to look at just what the first note here was. It was a G. And then in the next bar, the first measure was an E. And then the next measure, the first B is a D. So she's gone down a third and then down a step. And so so I'm looking at that saying, oh, well, if you go down if you remember the outline plan, when you have imitation at the 4th, which is what she has, right? She has a G in the original and then a C in the imitation. So her imitation is a 4th above. And what I had said was, well, as long as your leader always goes either up a step or down a third, you're going to create these nice thirds and 6ths between the voices. She didn't do that here. She's going from E to D, and therefore not going to get a third or 6th between the voices. She ends up with a 5th between the voices. But 5ths are fine. You know, there are things that you might want to fill out eventually, and she does. She reaches the F a beat later, and so that's fine. So you still get to hear the D minor chord. You just wait a beat to hear the F. So, so yeah, you're certainly allowed to have your outline not only go up a step or down a third. If you plan out that here is somewhere where I want a 5th, then you can do that, right? So I could keep going through that and reconstruct her outline that way. Maybe she changed her outline. I am a little curious now, Shelley, since you are here. Yeah, let's just listen to this. So the first, that's the opening line, and it gets imitated as, and it gets imitated in the other voice, and the bottom voice is just free. It's just there to support the canon harmonically so that it's not only 2 voices, but that we often get to hear a full triad. And it just makes it sound more interesting You can do interesting things with it rhythmically. If there's any dead spots in your canon where both voices have a long note, well, then you can let your bottom voice have the eighth notes or 16th notes to fill it out, which is exactly what she did right here. She's got a beat and a half of nothing happening, right? Beat and a half of nothing happening here in the canon, and so her bottom voice creates a little motion. Exactly what you want to do. So yeah, Shelley, my question for you is, well, did your outline have that D there? So you had a fifth in your outline, or is C the note that was actually in your outline and you just delayed it? Because that's one of the techniques that I talked about. In the outline, just because the outline shows a whole note, it doesn't mean you have to arrive on it right on beat one. You could wait a half a beat to arrive on whatever that outline note is. So anyhow, so yeah, I'm curious if your outline had the D or the C. But let's listen to it now and see what she came up with here. Lovely. It's just so fun seeing these things work out. Great job. So I actually, okay, so I should have done this in advance and didn't. But now I'm going to, because yeah, it's going to be worth it to listen, to check out where your outline was. And so I am going to find your outline, and then we're just going to compare and talk about that process of how she got there a little bit. And then we'll just listen to a few others and see what else comes up. But meanwhile, while that loads, if you follow this process, it's foolproof, right? I mean, if you do the thing of only going up a step or down a third, then imitation at the fourth always gives you thirds and sixths. And then as long as you fill in your follower and then imitate it fill in the leader and then imitate it in the follower, and then whatever you create in the follower to harmonize with that imitation. Like, so here, she created her, and then she imitated it up here. So as long as what she puts in the leader underneath the follower there works, and it does, right? She's got a sixth here, and then a sixth here, a seventh there, but it's resolving inward like we would want our sevenths to resolve. That totally works, right? So as long as you create your follower, what your leader is doing here, to harmonize with that, then we know it works. And then you copy and paste this up here, and you write something in your leader to harmonize with that. And then she wrote a bit of a dissonance there, a second, which is fine, and hopefully it then resolves nicely, and it does. It resolves nicely in contrary motion by step. So you're only having to write one measure of counterpoint at a time. Maybe that's like an important point that I could have made more clearly. If you're using this approach, that first thing that I did of saying, just make sure your leader goes up a step or down a third, you're not really writing counterpoint, right? You're just writing a simple melodic line. The counterpoint writing you're doing is that this process of, after you've copied your leader over to your follower, then writing something in the leader to harmonize with what's in the follower. That's like writing fifth species counterpoint. This is your cantus firmus, and this is the counterpoint you're writing against it. No, it's not a simple whole note cantus firmus, because that was just an exercise, right? A good exercise and a valuable one. And sometimes we are trying to harmonize against a whole note, but more often it's a more involved melody that you are trying to harmonize, which is why the project I did in the very first section of the course said, all right, let's write a harmony part to an existing melody. And that's exactly what she's done here. So this is like the first project after all those species counterpoint exercises where I was like, let's write counterpoint to an existing melody. That's exactly what is going on here, filling in the leader underneath the follower. And then the project for the 3-part counterpoint section was, let's take an existing 2-part piece and add a 3rd part. And everyone was like, oh, I don't want to do that because, well, not I don't want to, but that's going to be hard because wouldn't it be better to write all 3 parts together? But this is showing you that that's not what you're going to do. I mean, yeah, sometimes you might do that, but very often in imitative counterpoint, you're going to be in this position where 2 voices are fixed already. You can't change those. This is your canon. But now we're going to add a 3rd voice to it. And that's exactly what she's done. Right? So she's written one line and then written counterpoint against it, and then taken that 2-part exercise and written a 3rd part against that. So as long as you follow that procedure, it's guaranteed to produce something reasonable. And if you do take the time with your outline to make it like do the things you think you want it to do harmonically and so forth, then you will be in good position. And so I just want to find your outline. Here's your outline right here. Love it. So here's the deal. So her line is actually going up to the D, but then F here. So there's only a 3rd against it. So what changed? So like I remember I was seeing a 5th, and now I'm not seeing a 5th. So what changed? What changed? Does anyone? Okay, this is totally different. Am I looking at the right? Did you move it to another key? Oh, is it beat 2 that we're talking about? All right, maybe that's the deal. Okay, so you now fill me in. I'm doing some detective work here, Shelley, but your outline is beat 2 of this. E to C to D is beat 2. E to C to D. So she has offset her outline and led up to it with a beat, which is totally legitimate. That's totally fine. I think the way I set it up, I had used like suspensions to delay only slightly. You've actually written more significant bits of melody before your note, but that's fine, right? So yeah, that's really cool. I like that. And this is a thing that you will totally see happen if you look at a canon and then try to reverse engineer the outline from it. You'll often see that step up a step, down a 3rd, or if it's a canon at the 5th, it's going to be the other way around. Down a step or up a 3rd is what's going to work. And canons are possible at other intervals, and they will give you other combinations of what works for the leader to do. And sometimes you'll see that happening from beat 1 to beat 1. Sometimes it'll be beat 2 to beat 2. And so, yeah, it's usually in there somewhere. So anyhow, great job on this. And when I listen to it, there's things like that open 5th in the 3rd bar. When I hear open 5ths, my ear starts to tell me parallel 5ths. That's not to say there are parallel 5ths. I'm telling you, my ear tends to interpret anytime it hears an open 5th like that as the same sort of thing that parallel 5ths do to my ears, which is feel like something's missing. That's the best way I can describe it. Like though some bit of independence has disappeared, or this triad is not as full as it could be. So what I would wonder about here is if you wanted, there's nothing wrong with the 5th there, but this would be an opportunity for your bass to pick up that 5th. So instead of actually going into root position here, that'd be a great excuse to put a 3rd down here to fill that thing up. Right? to the D, and then hop up the octave. So those are the little tricks you can play in this bottom voice to make sure that if you do have fifths between your upper voices, then let the bottom voice have the third, and then that'll kind of solve that. And then you could, and then that also allowed it to do something kind of interesting of walking down to the root when we needed the root. So, or maybe it didn't need the root, but if that's the note you wanted, great. The other thing I like to do with the basses is, with this bass line, is look for opportunities to use little bits of the of whatever else is going on. And so you have this little lower neighbor figure, right? And then it gets repeated as, well, what if the bass right here went, or, right? It would just be just that, oh, you kind of do that here. But if you did it more explicitly, maybe put it right there on the beat. So let's check that out. I'm playing this again. So I went bum, boo-dum, bum, 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 walking down to the F. Just by using little bits of the motifs that you've had in the rest of the canon and giving them to the bass, it feels like the bass is participating in the canon, even though it isn't. Anyhow, great job with this. And throughout the piece, you've got those secondary dominants going there. And that was great that you were able to plan that and make that happen, because your outline didn't have the secondary dominant. But then that was one of the things I asked you to do, as the next step was look for opportunities to create tonicizations. And that's a place, obviously, she found to do that. So anyhow, fantastic job. So we're just going to listen to a few more. And I'm expecting the process is going, the processes everyone is following is essentially the same. So let's just see what we get. Here's Kevin. We've got a couple of Kevins. So this is Kevin Johnson, his canon in F. Yeah, I mean, these things just, they make me smile, because it's so cool that what we're doing here is taking everything we have learned in this course so far and putting it together now to create like a piece of music. I mean, and people have already done that, right? People's inventions sounded great. People's 3-part arrangements of pieces sounded great. And now we're like taking it to the next level of creating actual canons, and they're sounding great. And I'm just loving hearing this. So here he has also imitation at the fourth, which is what I used in my example, right? I used imitation at the fourth. And here's why I use imitation at the fourth. And this might be what Rebecca was getting at. I guess she's not here, or I would have seen an answer by now to my question about what she meant. But if you start off with scale degree 1, then if you imitate at the fourth, that means you're going to have scale degree 4. Well, the 1 chord likes to resolve to the 4 chord, right? So it's moving in the right way on the circle of fifths. Or if you have scale degree 2 in your leader, then your follower, if you're following at the fourth, is going to have scale degree 5. 2 to 5 is also circle of fifths motion. So you're going to get this circle of fifths type of progression, 2 to 5 to 1, for free when you do imitation at the fourth, which is kind of nice. So as long as your harmonic rhythm is the same, you're actually going to have a whole measure of 2, a whole measure of 5, a whole measure of 1, and there might be passing chords in there also. But as long as the basic harmony of that measure is meant to be 2, the basic harmony of the next measure is meant to be 5, and basic harmony of the next measure is meant to be 1, imitation at the fourth gives you circle of fifths motion for free, which is kind of nice about it. In point of fact, it's probably not as common as imitation at the fifth. for various reasons, but the main one being that imitation at the fifth gives you a 5 chord right away. Your first note was, if your first note is scale degree 1, the follower is going to follow with scale degree 5, which feels like it wants to go back to 1. And so you're creating a simple 1 to 5 and hopefully coming back to 1 motion. So imitation at the fifth is really common, but fourth is kind of convenient. So yes, and the comment about suspensions, that's one of the things I did in my demonstration was used suspensions, and that's totally what Kevin is doing here. His outline is really F down to D, right? It's up a step or down a third. His down a third is F down to D, but he has delayed the D and allowed there to be this suspension, allowed that E to carry over. It doesn't have to be a suspension. It could be a note, just another note right on the beat, which is what Shelley did, or it could be an appoggiatura. It could be other kinds of non-chord tones, passing tones, or whatever. But using suspensions feels stylistically like what people do when writing canons. And I think part of the reason is suspensions blur bar lines, right? You don't hear everyone coming together on the bar line. Only one voice had something on that beat. And so therefore it creates a looser sense of meter. And that is a common thing in canons, that they're often going to blur the sense of meter. Inventions and other kinds of pieces typically feel like they're more metronomic, a measure at a time. But in canons, you often see this blurring going on, and suspensions are one of the things that create that. So excellent. So yeah, so I'm just going to check this out again and see if there's any other particular comments to make here. It's just really nice. So there's two things that I wanted to comment about that I'm listening for and then trying to understand what's happening. So one is there is a little bit of parallelism, like parallel fifth kind of stuff happening with the bass voice that you'll have to think about. And again, I can't give you rules to say, here's when it's okay to do this, here's when it's not. You're just going to have to listen. But here's what I notice in the bottom voice. We have this perfect fifth on beat 3, and then that perfect fifth there. So there's like 2 open fifths in a row. And not any, is there a rule that says you can't have 2? They're not in a row. They're not literally next to each other, but there's not much between them. Right? The top voice doesn't move at all. The bottom voice just has a single note between them. Well, no, it's got this third between them. So it's got stuff between them. I can't deny that. But anytime you have these fifths between 2 voices at all in proximity, you just need to listen carefully and ask yourself if that's what you want. If you decide you don't, it's super easy to fix here because there's no imitation demanding that be a B flat or that might be a G. I definitely want that to be a G because we're trying to state a G minor chord, and having that G in the bass does the job because the upper voices don't have the G yet. But that B flat really didn't need to be there. So what if that B flat were a D instead? Then we wouldn't have 2 fifths in close proximity. So that B flat totally didn't need to be there, right? It created some harmonic interest, absolutely. But so would have keeping the A or changing to D. I didn't try keeping the A. Any of those are possibilities, right? So yeah, you just get to think about such things in your writing. And then a similar thing happens here in this measure. Right? We have the octave on the beat and then the octave on the and of the next beat, separated by just that 8th note. I think this one is more problematic. This one probably you could get away with, especially if the tempo were any faster or if there were anything going on in that top voice, I never would have noticed. This one, I think I probably would have noticed no matter what. Those parallel octaves. And again, they just don't need to be there. That G doesn't have to be a G. This could have been a C or a half note on the F, right? You have lots of flexibility in that free voice to avoid those sorts of parallelisms. So the other thing I was wondering about that I'm trying to figure out is if there was a playback glitch or if I'm just hearing that rest, because it felt like a voice dropped out here in the downbeat of bar 5. And I just want to hear that measure again to see what's going on. Oh, it's staccato. That's what's going. That staccato note. So the staccato note, combined with the fact that one voice is resting, combined with the fact that the other voice is held over from the previous bar, causes it to feel like kind of nothing is happening on that beat. And I personally think just removing the staccato would make me happier, as far as, because it feels like something broke there. Also, the full chord coming in after that sort of maybe exacerbates it. If you had an accent mark on the B flat, maybe that would also change my impression of it. Anyhow, that's just like a small detail thing that I noticed. But yeah, I love that you managed to get, you got that lovely tonicization. And another one there, right? So we got the 5 of 2 going to 2, and then 5 of 5 going to 5. So these are the sorts of things, again, those planned tonicizations that are much, and for that matter, the 5 of 4 here, that E flat, 5 of 4 going to the 4. So he's managed to get all these little tonicizations in here. And again, if you tried to write a canon without that outline first, if you try to write a canon without that outline first, then I'm not saying you would never come up with those tonicizations, but because you don't know what's coming next, you're less likely to, and then you might go back and try to do it and then find it causes a problem because you weren't planning for it, right? And yes, Dave, definitely, if this were loaded up in a MuseScore, someone could try it, and I can try just playing this thing, because I think I can try to play this. Oh, I'm resolving it. There's still something about, I took my hand off the E flat also. I don't know. You'd have to try, because I'm not playing it up to the tempo it might eventually go at either. But yeah, absolutely within MuseScore, when you're doing this, you try it with and without the staccato, you try with an accent, you try not putting that rest down. I love that those rests. I've been harping on a little bit the fact that people are not using rests much, and it's causing everything to have kind of a similar texture throughout, and that don't be afraid to incorporate rests into your counterpoint. And Kevin's doing a great job of avoiding that here. And yeah, I'm just running off the website because then I don't have to worry about weird playback glitches and extra time of loading things and downloading things. So it's just easier for me to play these back directly from the website. So anyhow, it's just really nice. And again, it's a canon, right? And then, right? So it's absolutely a canon. And following this procedure, you're gonna get results. So I'm just gonna keep hunting around a little bit here, Sora, because I see you're here. Let's listen to yours. So Sora is trying something. Oh, good. And you've got your outline here. So Sora is doing something totally different. I mean, she's following this procedure, but she's not using a major or minor scale. She's using a scale. Hey, Jazz, I don't know how you say any of these words, but it's a is a scale. You could tell us more about the scale. I will say it is a historic scale of certain Middle Eastern cultures. Is the best way I know to describe it, because I don't know it, but it's basically this scale, right? Is it got an E natural? Wait a minute, you're not using, oh yeah, it's that scale. Okay, so this is then, and so because it's that scale, not a major scale, not a minor scale, like the circle of fifths is different. I mean, it does have a fifth. Oh, wait a minute, is it a G flat? No, it's a G natural, right? But so it's got a fifth from 5 to 1, but it doesn't have a fifth from 2 to 1, from 2 to 5. So where the perfect fifths are is different. So how the circle of fifths works for this is going to be different. And so it's got different chords that are, oh, the scale is at the end. Nice. But, I think I played it right. Anyhow, so you got a couple different versions. Well, I'm just going to play the first one because it's what I see first. But no, first let's hear the outline so people can get a sense of what this is. So this is still that same procedure of figuring out what intervals are going to work. But this is down a third, but she's making it up a sixth, which is totally fine, right? I say the intervals are up a step or down a third, but it can easily be a seventh or a sixth instead of steps and thirds, because we know it's not just going to jump straight there. The line is going to do something like what she has, right? It works its way up to that A flat. So anyhow, brilliant. So yes, and yes, the Phrygian. You're right, Dave. That is the same scale that a modern musician would probably call a Phrygian dominant, because it's basically a Phrygian scale, but with a raised third, so that it has a dominant seventh chord within it. So unless I'm missing something and off by one somewhere, but I don't think I am, that is another name for the same scale. It's not a historically accurate name, but it's a descriptive name that modern musicians who use scales as resources for improvisation, Phrygian dominant is the term that I would use. So anyhow, that was the outline, and it's down a third, or in this case up a sixth, another down a third, up a step, down a third, up a step, down a third, and then concludes with down a step, giving this Phrygian cadence at the end. So yeah, there you go, Phrygian. So so now it's time to hear the resulting cadence. I mean, the resulting canon. It's so darn cool. Okay, and then this is the version with the bass. So I'm going to go on and listen to the version with the bass, because I guess I hadn't realized that was the big difference. Oh, and then this is it arranged for string, but I'm going to use it. Yeah, let's hear the string version. There's the scale there. So, yeah, I mean, it's just so cool that this technique that, was developed for kind of late Renaissance Baroque music, in which you're using these sorts of canons, the same technique can be applied to other types of scales and get wildly different results, right? That doesn't sound anything like Kevin's, which frankly didn't sound anything like Shelley's, because they were dealing with kind of, I mean, Kevin and Shelley were using the same techniques, the same basic, major scale, but because their line did different things, and they did different things with how they connected their line, their follower took chose different intervals, and then they connected them differently. They got very different sounding results out of the same materials. And here, by changing the source material to a totally different scale, you get different results still. And the thing is, if you look at just the two-voice version, right, this is totally normal, legitimate. That right there could have been written by Bach, right? I mean, there's no, if you only saw that measure, that measure is all consonances, right? There's thirds between the voices there, and then some passing tones, and then a fifth here. But then again, consonances. It's highly, highly consonant. A sixth there, a third octave, sixth, third, the dissonance here, as a passing tone, third, sixth. This is the first place she's placed a dissonance on the B, but it's only there for a 16th note, so it's an accented appoggiatura, and a nice leap to a dissonance, an appoggiatura there, and then a sixth here. Now this a double appoggiatura, we might call it, or something of that nature. You could put a name to it. It's a dissonance. The G against the F, it doesn't resolve right away, but it resolves after arpeggiating. It's a double enclosure, or whatever we want to call this thing. So it's using techniques that are, up until that point anyhow, totally, in fact, up until that one dissonance we had, now I don't remember where it was, the first dissonance, that I guess it was this guy here, up until that point in the piece, there was nothing in it that went different than what species counterpoint suggests doing, right? It was all consonances where the notes line up. All the dissonances were passing tones or neighboring tones. This is the first time we've done something that's maybe not within species counterpoint, but totally within what Bach would do. Bach totally would put a dissonance on the B and then resolve it indirectly by means of arpeggiating first, right? So everything about the two-voice counterpoint here, kind of beat to beat, measure to measure, is species counterpoint according to very traditional Renaissance. I mean, this is fantastic. I just love how this came out, and I'm taking your word for it that it's actually even a canon. But and then, right, it's definitely leader follower, and then. Yeah, it's totally a canon. She's doing exactly the right thing. If you write this line, copy and paste it here, and then she already had that high A flat in her outline, and she knew she needed to reach an F in the next bar, and then she just wrote a bit of counter to the letter. This is brilliant. I mean, you followed exactly the procedure and then came up with this just totally unique sounding thing. And then your version with the bass, I mean, it's still the case that you're just adding notes that fill out the chord or otherwise harmonize things, right? The 3-note combinations here that line up. We have an F, an A flat, and an F. I mean, that's an F minor triad, right? No way around that. So if you look at these places, it's true that chord ends up being augmented because of that raised scale degree. You get an augmented triad there, but that's exactly the triad. So yeah, brilliant. I love it. Absolutely love it. All right, got time to just listen to one more. And let me bring up my thing here where I bookmark things. Who's Sora Glenn? I'm going to jump over to Patrick's, actually. He was actually, I think, the first person to get one up. And he did a couple different versions. And this is the version he did with sequences. And yeah, it's another like great job of just taking the raw materials and doing what one needs to do to them to make it work. So here is Patrick's one of the versions, because he did a couple different versions, but here's one of them. So great job here as well. So now obviously this is rhythmically more simple, and it also, it's back to just the major scale, but it's totally, here's our leader, and then it's imitated with, right? So it's totally doing the canon stuff. There's places where he's doing things like he's using fourths in places here. Right, this fourth on the beat here is, something they would say, well, don't do that if this was second species counterpoint, 2 against 1. In a Renaissance context, don't put that fourth there. But you got to remember two things here. One of those two things is, well, A, it's not the Renaissance anymore. If this is Baroque music, or someone composing during the Baroque would have had no issues with putting a fourth on the beat and then saying it's just an accented passing tone. The idea of accented passing tones are totally legit in Baroque and later music. And so that's what this is. This G is basically an accented passing tone getting me to the F. Furthermore, fourths are only problematic to the extent they're problematic at all if they're involving the bass voice. I won't even say the bottom voice, because one could argue if you've got two flutes going, fourths won't be a problem because neither of them are going to sound like bass. One could argue that. But this piece has a third part that could be added. Patrick hasn't done it yet that I know of, unless he has and I've missed it. I know you said you're going to, but I don't know that it's happened. But if we added a third voice there, then this fourth wouldn't necessarily be the bottom voice. If you put a B below it, then suddenly it's a fourth on top, and it's just a first inversion triad. One of the reasons I wanted to focus on Patrick's is, for as simple as things are, he brilliantly did the sequence thing. And then, and then, he breaks it finally. So that idea of explicitly planning to create sequences, that's another thing that the outline thing gives you, is the ability to notice, as long as your outline follows up a step, like this one is up a step, then down a third. As long as you're consistent about that, then up a step, and then down a third, and then up a step, and then down a third. As long as your leader is following a consistent pattern of up a step, down a third, or whatever the pattern is, could be up a step, could be down a third, then up a step, whatever. As long as its pattern is repeating consistently, this means not only are you going to have a statement here imitated here, a statement in the leader imitated in the follower. Not only that, but it means the next measure, the leader can then do the same thing again, because that's what's happening. The leader has, and then. So as long as your leader keeps as long as the outline of the leader keeps following that same pattern, then the leader itself can keep repeating that sequence. And you'll get that idea of, here's a motif in the leader, then here it is in the follower, then here it is again in the leader, then there it is again in the follower, then there it is again in the leader, then there it is again in the follower, which is, again, a very typical device, especially in Baroque music, to have that idea of this thing being passed back and forth like that. So, this, to me, was one of the clearest examples of the sequencing, in part because A, it was the first one I saw, but B, because it was short and simple, and then didn't have a bass voice yet to distract me from the sequences. Because it's very possible that other people had sequences in theirs that I just didn't see, or that, they had short sequences I did see, but maybe other people had ones that were that long that I missed. But this one, it's right there for everyone to see, plain and simple, and a great model. So anyhow, canons, aren't they fun? So the thing is, even if you don't want to write a whole canon, I don't know that I've ever written like more than 8 measures of canon at a time, but those 8 measures can be so interesting to work with and then incorporate into something else. And so when we work on motets, which we'll start on next week, and then fugues, which we'll work on after that, we're going to have little sections that use canon techniques within them. So it's great that people are having this opportunity. Man, I love this. So let's end on that note there, because our time is up here. And see if this wants to play back. Now it's probably going to play back all stuttery, but that's all right. I will not worry about it. Wow, it's just falling way behind. Yeah, just turn that way down because it's going to be weird. All right, thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for all the great music people have been submitting. And I just love that we're seeing over and over, you follow the procedure, you will get results. I mean, it's follow the procedure, they work. And that's what I got to tell you. So if you haven't done your canon yet, by all means, get it in, and go through the practice, go through the exercise, see what comes up for you, comment on each other's, ask questions, and so forth. Next week we're going to start on a Renaissance, a very specific form, sort of specific, called the motet, which is a form, and it's going to involve, like, we'll do a motet in 4 voices when we get to a project, but you'll learn more about Renaissance music in terms of the conventions of the modes and how the imitation might work when we have 4 voices to play with, and all sorts of things about how motets are put together. And then we're going to try our hand at writing one. So that's what we'll be doing for the next few weeks. Look forward to seeing you next time. All right, bye everyone.